Hi everyone, welcome back to This Book Belongs to Pam. We are going to be talking about all of the books that I read in February. So in February, I read a total of 7 books. I listened to 1 audiobook and then read 6 books in my Kindle. First book that I read was Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. So what is this book about? It's a contemporary novel where a bank robbery turned hostage situation occurs in an apartment viewing with 8 strangers. So by the end of the day, the father and son police duo rescues all of the hostages, but the perpetrator vanishes in thin air. This book has a very approachable and conversational writing style. The author, Fredrik Backman, often talks to you as the reader, so like breaking the fourth wall. What I like about this is that although it's very simply written, it touches on a lot of difficult and heavy subjects such as mental health, marriage, parenthood, anxiety. It talks about it in a dark comedy but approachable kind of way. You know, when you're not really feeling good in the inside, but then you tend to like joke around about how you're feeling. That's kind of how this book felt while I was reading it. It isn't really about how the perpetrator managed to escape, but it's more about the conversations, the connections that happens within the apartment viewing as these people who are in this very high tension situation starts to learn about each other. It ends up being very comedic, absurd even, but at the same time very thought-provoking, very heartwarming. My biggest takeaway from this book is that things aren't always what they seem, which I know is obvious, it's very cliche, but honestly things are cliche for a reason, and that's because we as a society, we need to be reminded of them all the time because we tend to take it for granted, we tend to forget it and just set it aside because it's so obvious. I guess just be kind. I guess that's just really the takeaway. Just be kind to one another. There are a couple of quotes that stuck with me while I was reading this book. So on living, the book says, "We don't have a plan, we just do our best to get through the day because there'll be another one coming tomorrow." And then on depression, "When you're drowning, you can't call for help, you can't wave your arms, you just sink. Your family can be standing on the beach waving cheerfully to you, completely unaware that you are dying." On identity, they say that a person's personality is a sum of their experiences, but that isn't true, at least not entirely, because if our past was all that defined us, we'd never be able to put up with ourselves. We need to be allowed to convince ourselves that we're more than the mistakes we made yesterday, that we are all of our next choices too, all of our tomorrows. Those quotes were really powerful for me, and it helps me, put things into perspective. I think it's a good read for anyone. The topics that they discuss can be, very dark, but the approach is very light and, like I said, it's very heartwarming. So yeah, that was Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. The second book that I read was Leave the World Behind by Rumaan. So I read this for my Magical Readathon, so I'm gonna leave the vlog for Magical Readathon in the cards or below. So Leave the World Behind. You have a typical white family who rents out an Airbnb in the middle of like rural United States for a staycation. Things start to take a turn for the worse when they get cut off from the rest of the world. The internet gets cut off, phone lines get cut off, they don't get any signal on the TV, and then they're in the middle of pretty much nowhere. And then things get even weirder because they get a knock on the door from a black couple who claims that they own the Airbnb and they're asking if they could stay the night. So that is the premise. It's kind of like a for me, it's not like a thriller or a mystery, but that's sort of the vibe that you get when you read the blurb. It's more of like a character study for me. I keep going back and forth with this book. I didn't really like it when I finished reading it. Now that I've, separated myself from the text for like a couple of weeks, I think I appreciate it a little bit more. The book is pretty much set inside the Airbnb. So there are a couple of times that they go out of it, but it's pretty much just inside the Airbnb, and our characters have zero idea of what's happening in the outside world. And actually, the readers as well don't have an idea, although us as a reader, we get glimpses of what's happening in the outside world, but the characters, they are clueless. Much of the book revolves around this atmosphere of dread, of uncertainty, of frustration. We pretty much get a front row seat to the characters, like inner monologues as they go through this unknown and very sort of frustrating experience. And this way, the author effectively paints a picture of each character's persona. But my main gripe about this book is that it feels overwritten in every definition of the word. The internal exposition that every single character goes through every other chapter was just tedious, very tedious to get through. I like to think that it was written this way in order to sort of convey how time drags when you have no clue of what's happening and you have no access to the outside world, to the internet, and how your mind goes into like a spiral of thought after thought after thought when you're faced with a situation where nothing is certain and nothing can be made certain. But honestly, the experience of reading it was just horrible. The first half of the book was quite good because it has this tension that keeps you hooked, keeps you interested. I guess in a way the author succeeded in what feeling he was trying to get the reader to have while reading this book. So yeah, that was Leave the World Behind by Rumaan. The third book that I read was Where Dreams Descend by Janella. This is also for Magical Readathon, so again, I'm gonna link that vlog in the cards and in the description. So Where Dreams Descend, I really had a fun time reading this book. This is a YA fantasy novel with sprinkles of romance, and this novel has been described as Phantom of the Opera x Moulin Rouge, and honestly I quite agree with that. Moulin Rouge in a sense that you have a stunning show magician, Kalia, who performs as the star of the nightclub Hellfire House. Kalia adores the spotlight, but as she gets to know herself more, gets to realize her powers more, she starts to feel trapped and feel caged in, which brings me to the Phantom of the Opera side of the story. You have the master of the Hellfire House, Jack, and Jack is Kalia's mentor. Jack taught Kalia everything she knew about magic and pretty much everything she knew about life. Kalia grew up in Hellfire House, and that's, the world that she has ever known, and Jack was the one who curated that world for her according to what he thinks she needed. But ultimately, Jack is keeping Kalia a prisoner inside the nightclub. Kalia ultimately decided to escape the Hellfire House, and she joins a show magician tournament in the mysterious city of Glorian in order to discover and I guess flaunt her powers, because she's pretty cool, she's pretty badass, and she wants the world to know about her. But she ends up discovering more than she bargained for. So that is pretty much the premise of the book, and I really loved it. It's not a perfect book by any means. In my opinion, it could improve on the dialogues because they can be pretty dry, feel like very robotic in a way. But I think overall, the book itself is very fun to read. I really love this book. I had an amazing reading experience with it. I had a great time with it, and all of the imagery that it gave me made me want to watch Moulin Rouge again, and I did, and it really amped up the reading experience for me. So if you want like a lighter fantasy series, it's a duology, When Night Breaks, which I'm gonna read this month. So if you want like a light fantasy series that has, a very charming setting and a strong female lead, then I definitely recommend you read Where Dreams Descend by Janella. Also plus points because she, the author, is Filipino-American, so yay! Where Dreams Descend by Janella. The fourth book that I read, which I actually listened to in audiobook, is Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino. This is a collection of essays written by Gia Tolentino, mostly centering around the topic of self-reflection, of how we are affected by the things that are happening outside of us, things like, economic situations, the experience of being a woman, the internet, things like that. I really enjoyed the first essay, which is I in the Internet. It really talks about the things that I personally worry about, how much of ourselves do we place on the internet, and how much of ourselves do we tie, how much of our values do we tie to the things that we do online. So things like, social media metrics, comparing ourselves to the things that we see online. We have a lot more access to the world outside of us, and sometimes it feels like us humans are not really wired to have this much information at every second of every day. And I think that essay really put into words all of the sort of the thoughts and worries that I've had ever since, you know, the internet became a lot more prevalent, because I feel like I'm very fortunate to have lived in a time without the internet and sort of be able to contrast it and compare it now that the internet is pretty much in every single thing that I do in life. There are a lot of other essays in there as well. Like I said, this is a collection of essays, which understandably I'm not gonna like every single essay in there. But I do think that Eye on the Internet is a very good essay, and I think anyone should read it, especially if you spend a lot of time on the internet and, you know, you work in some kind of digital field like design and social media and things like that. So yeah, that was Trick Mirror by Tolentino. The next book that I read was Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzales. I actually got recommended this book when I was asking on Instagram for books with bisexual main characters, and Instagram delivered. Thank you very much, because this book is a very heartwarming, fluffy, young adult romance with a bisexual main character, and I really enjoyed it. It's a very quick read, and I really appreciate the discussion on bi erasure, internalized biphobia, and bisexuality in general. I think it did a great job on touching upon those subjects. The way that those topics were discussed felt quite nuanced, and honestly, it was super approachable. It can be quite intimidating for people to talk about these topics, but I think the book approached it in a way that is casual but still very nuanced and impactful. So I really enjoyed this book, and I'm looking forward to reading other books by Sophie Gonzales. And yeah, I also read this book as part of a 24-hour readathon, so I'm gonna link that in the cards and in the description box below. And then I read Bunny by Mona Awad. I read this for Magical Readathon as well, and oh my gosh, Bunny, where do I even begin with this book? How do I even begin to talk about Bunny? So Bunny felt like a very profound fever dream. That's kind of like the best way that I can put it, and I mean that in the best way possible. So the book starts with our main girl, Samantha, and she is studying writing. She's on a scholarship in this very exclusive, very elite, like literature slash writing university, and the book starts with her observing 4 students in the same university, 4 students who are, you know, very cliquish. And she calls them the bunnies because those 4 students, they call each other bunny. She doesn't like these people. She thinks they're pretentious, and she thinks that they're so wealthy that they can do whatever they want. You know how you have this criticism of the academia as kind of like very romanticized, out of touch. So that's how she thinks of the bunnies. But one day, she gets an invite to one of the parties that the bunnies host. She attends, and things changes from there. I can't really talk about this book that much because honestly, you just have to read it and see for yourself what you think of it. If you're not in the right mindset to read it, because you do have to pay attention to a lot of small details, to a lot of sort of clues that the author leaves for us in order to sort of get this general understanding of what the book is about. Otherwise, it's really just a very confusing, very weird fever dream, because nothing will make sense at all, even if when you read the end, if you don't like pick up on those breadcrumbs that the author sort of leaves for us. Overall, I really enjoyed the book. I like how it talks about imagination, about being a writer, and how writers sort of live in their stories in a way. And you know, it also touches upon like things like mental health, as well as the expectations that people put on themselves and the lengths that they go to meet those expectations. So things like that. I really love the book. I do think I need to reread it. This was the first book that made me feel like I needed to annotate. I needed to tab things. I needed to highlight and underline. I was like highlighting like crazy on my Kindle. Doesn't feel the same because I can't put like my notes on it and whatnot. So I'm actually looking forward to rereading this book at some point and maybe annotating it in the future. So yeah, that was Bunny by Mona Awad. And finally, the last book that I read was si Janus Silang at ang Labanang Mananangal-Mambabarang. So this is the second book in the Janus Silang series. Book 1 left us with like a very crazy cliffhanger. Like honestly, my jaw was like this when I read the ending for book 1. I wasn't sure where E.C. Samar, the author, will take us in book 2. I think book 2 was a lot slower in terms of, things happening in terms of the plot, but I think book 2 did a better job at world building and sort of introducing us to different concepts in the world of Janus Silang without it being too info dumpy. I think I like this more than book 1. And again, E.C. Samar left us in a very intense cliffhanger at the end. I think he's very good at that. And I can't wait to read book 3, which I plan to read this month. I can't really talk much about this book without spoiling the first one. So yeah, if you can read and understand Tagalog, I do recommend reading Janus Silang. The plot is very interesting. Basically, you have this online game called Tala that people play. It's a massive multiplayer online game, and one day people start dying while they're playing the game, except for our guy Janus Silang. So he didn't die, but all of his friends inside the same sort of computer shop, they all die. So now he's so confused and he wants to find out what is going on. Why did he survive? Why are people dying? Is this because of the game? So yeah, that's sort of like the premise, and then you get launched into a world with all of these legends coming through. All of the folk stories that we knew when we were kids were apparently real. So it's very fantasy filled, and I really like that because I'm not as knowledgeable about my, local folklore as I want to be. I think this series does a great job at introducing those to me. So yeah, Janus Silang at ang Labanang, Mananangal-Mambabarang. So yeah, those were all of the books that I read in February. I'm quite proud of myself because I read 7 books. Normally I just read like 5 books. So I'm proud of myself that I ended up reading that many books, and it's mostly because I was joining readathons and I needed to read the books to, fulfill things for the readathon, and I think that's a good motivation in it itself, as long as I don't get stressed out. If you're curious about the books that I'm going to be reading in March this month, I will link my TBR in the cards as well as in the description box below. So I think that is it for me. I will see you in the next video. Bye!